Tonight is the first Thursday of the month. It's the first and the first Thursday. So we're going to do question and answer. And it's very dramatic over here. I don't know if it's raining where you guys are, but we got some thunder and lightning. It's very close, right? Does that mean it's 5 miles or 5 kilometers? 5 miles. It could get us at any moment. So if this feed goes out, you'll know what happened. Call 911 and have them come to the dojo. So whenever we do question and answer, here's the standard disclaimer. Your questions can be anything, but try to give me something that I can somehow tie into meditation or like the internal parts of our practice. Could be something like forgiveness or whatever. But this is not the answer. It's not even the best answer that I will ever give. If you ask me again in 10 years, I'll give you a much better answer. So these are not written in stone anywhere. They're not written in blood anywhere that I know of. This is not the answer, but make your question kind of short, concise, complete, and there are no dumb questions, only dumb people who don't ask enough questions. If you guys are watching on social, you can type it in the comment section. If you're watching at home, you can raise your hand or press the button to raise your hand. So, any questions? I have nothing prepared, so somebody better have a question. Yes, Kaya?
Sir, my question is about teaching, of what it was like for you when you first started. The context is I recently started teaching energy healing classes, and I'm teaching like my teacher's material. And I'm like, of course, he's so much better than me. People should go directly to the source, and I'm probably messing half of it up. But I'm curious of like, being your own person and teaching it in a way that's comfortable while still someone else's.
Yeah. So you want story time from Sifu's early days of messing everything up. So when I first started teaching, I was still at my Sifu school back in Michigan and very much under the watchful eye. And sometimes it was very like I was shrinking under the watchful eye, just thinking I'm doing everything wrong and he sees it all. And sometimes he would tell me all the things that I did wrong. And when I finally struck out on my own and went west and opened the school, there was a lot of it where I was thinking like, oh, my Sifu does it right, and I want to be exactly like him. And I definitely did that to the point of error where it was like I was trying to be somebody who I'm not. And I think this is a very common thing. And of course, you're right. I mean, I had a slightly different experience with that because nobody in LA is most likely going to move to Michigan to take classes, although we have had a couple of students who have moved there and taken classes with them. But it's unlikely that somebody's going to be comparing me to Sifu Brown directly. So I had a little bit less of that feeling of like, why don't they just go take it from somebody better? Because I know I'm better than everybody else here, just not better than him. I'm kidding, but not totally. The desire, though, to like do it right and all that, some of it for me was very much like, I don't want to get in trouble. And I definitely had some people come and visit from Michigan. I was like, I hope they don't go back and tell them that I've been messing this up. And that's something that I think logically is kind of easy to let go of, but there's an emotional side of it where, I don't want to disappoint and I don't want to get in trouble. And so that kind of has a tendency to stay. But I think mostly free of that at this point. I think recognizing that fear of getting in trouble or getting it wrong is an important thing to recognize in anything that we're doing. And I think as teachers, a lot of times we really have that experience of imposter syndrome, especially when you're comparing yourself to somebody else specifically. And in my experience, imposter syndrome is just another fun way that our ego messes with us. It's just like, your ego trying to tell you some reason why you're doing it wrong and you're messing up. And it just so happens to be the flavor of this day is you're comparing yourself to your old teacher. And the next day it's like, oh, this person's yawning. And the next day it's whatever it is. But there's always something that you could be finding wrong with what you're doing. So try to let go of that. And I think that another great way to look at this is in this book Kodo, which is out of print now, sadly. It's top 10 like best martial arts book ever. And there's a little section, I think it's even just like in the margins of one of the chapters, he puts this little phrase, this little saying, and it's like, I'm gonna paraphrase. He says something like it's every great teacher's dream to be a stepping stone for their students. And the dream of a teacher is to be surpassed by their students. Now, that might not be how your teacher feels all the time. And it's certainly like if I'm sparring or grappling with Sam and it's like he gets me with something, I'm not like every single time, yes, like he beat me and that's amazing. But that's the general feeling that I think we have if we're, relatively confident. So remember that your teachers, I think every teacher that you've had in your life, if they really think about it, wants you to surpass them. And that does not necessarily mean that you're better at everything. That's pretty unlikely, but for sure at some things. And that kind of necessarily means that you're gonna have to find your own way. Now, there's a distinction between I'm gonna find my own way because it's a more efficient, effective, smoother way, and the distinction between that and I'm gonna find my own way because it's me and I'm gonna prove to the world that I'm the best, because nothing good ever comes from that. That's when the ego gets involved, and that's when we kind of keep ourselves small, and it's actually not gonna lend itself, that kind of attitude doesn't lend itself to creativity or being empowered. It just lends itself to you feeling like you gotta prove yourself, and you go at it from a small place, from the ego place. So instead, think of it like my teacher wants me to step on and be a stepping stone. My teacher wants me to surpass and find my own way, and this is how the world goes around. This is how martial arts works. This is how meditation works. I mean, there are only so many ways of punching or kicking or sitting and breathing, but if everybody just decided the first way that there was to punch, which was probably like this, if everyone was like, that's it, we're never going to improve this because this is what our teacher said, everyone would just be walking around with broken wrists and hands in martial arts. The first person who decided, like, we're going to try to meditate and still the mind, I mean, I'm sure they gave up after 5 seconds. It was a disaster. So you have to go beyond and find what, there's some kind of unique thing that you're going to add to energy work, to energy healing. There's some kind of unique thing that you're going to add to whatever you're doing. This is true if you're, black coating the dojo. This is true if you're teaching somebody anything in there. There's something for you to add, but it doesn't need to come from you as in you ego. It should really come through you. So when you kind of set your little self out of the way, that's when kind of the real you, your highest self, gets to go to work. And that's when it feels effortless. That's when it feels like it's flowing. And I'm sure you're going to be familiar with that. So let go of this idea of having to do it the exact way that you were taught, and still keep the principles, and most of it should probably be really well intact. And then also let go of the idea of I'm going to make up my own thing here. I'm going to do it all so that I can show people how great I am. Just kind of let all of that go and just let it flow through you and see what happens. And you'll make mistakes. As soon as you start to flow, the thing is you make a mistake and then you kind of direct yourself. You rebalance to a place that makes sense. So good luck and tell me how it's going. Other question, Christine?
So the original question of the week was about how you respond when making mistakes. Mistakes.
That was last week, right?
I think so.
Yeah, don't confuse me. Got it. Last week, how do you respond when you make mistakes?
Yeah. So someone who is very hard on themselves with every mistake, how do you improve, like letting it not affect you as much?
Yeah. I can't say that I have a ton of personal experience with this. I was the opposite before martial arts. I didn't care at all about my own mistakes, but I understand that this is the kind of person that exists because I think most of my students are like this. And you know what? I think partly it is really important to recognize this and accept this about ourselves. How are we, right? Are we too lazy and don't care about getting it right? Are we so much of a perfectionist that really drives us, and we feel stuck in that way. And pretending that that's not the way that we are naturally isn't going to get us anywhere. It's kind of like the challenge of this week: recognize when you have a negative thought and return to the breath. It's not because you're trying to pretend that this negative thing isn't happening. It's not like I was using the example of the leak because every time it rains, it still leaks in here, even after the 10th time that we've told the landlord. And it's not as bad as it was in the last building, because there would be a lake on the mats every time, and it would move over to like our electronics and everything. So this is not great, but not terrible. But if we just pretend that the leak isn't happening, the leak does not get fixed, and it will eventually get so bad that, like it did a while ago, the light falls out of the ceiling. And so something has to be done about it. But there's a difference between that and I'm laying in bed, because this is what happens to me whenever it rains. I have PTSD from the rain getting into the dojo and messing up our stuff. And so I'll be laying there in bed stressing about the rain and thinking, what's it going to be like in there tomorrow? And I know that I'm not going to get out of bed and go to the dojo at 3 a.m. to see if there's a leak on the mats or not. But I also know that I'll probably show up and there will be a leak on the mats in the morning. But I accept it. There's nothing I can do about the rain. It's raining. No matter how much I try to wish that it wasn't raining, there's nothing to be done about that. That is what there is to accept. And if there is something else to be done, I'll figure it out tomorrow. I'll make a note to remember the next time it's raining, put a bucket out where it's going to leak. That's what we're going to do tonight. So to that point, acceptance, accepting what is, it's raining, and then getting to work with what there is to be done about it. And maybe there's something to be done right now, and maybe there's not. And so if there's not anything to be done right now, then we want to be able to practice just letting go and being in the present. And as a perfectionist, I think that's probably not very easy. So that's why you're asking me the question. So part of it is practicing. I'll tell you, I think martial arts, and this is to plug the dojo, of course, I think martial arts is a great way to practice this, because you are doing nothing if not constantly making mistakes and being able to either let go of it or let it fester, and then you experience how that does not help. And so at the very least, you see what's not working. You can try to let go of it next time. But really what we're trying to do is, in the moment, we recognize we made a mistake. The recognition of the mistake is not a bad thing. It's the holding on to it. And it's the wishing that it were different. And it's the refusing to accept what is. And that sounds like a lot to happen in one moment, but that really is what creates that resistance for us. So we practice recognizing it and then kind of creating a little gap between that and any kind of judgment. Self-judgment as opposed to acceptance, right? In that little gap, we can choose, okay, I accept this is where I'm at, and then I can get to work on something to do about it. And the really nice thing that I wish that I could work on, but I kind of have had this nailed since I was a kid, is accepting what is and being totally okay with it. What I have to work on more naturally is actually doing something about it. But we all have our journeys. So meditation is a great way to deal with it, because you can recognize the thought and then you can practice letting it go. Practice in class is great. You recognize it, you let it go. In class, we have this there's this immediacy because there's something else coming, right? If you messed up because you sidestepped the wrong way, your partner's about to punch again, so you don't have time to ruminate on that. But somebody did ask me a great question this morning about this. We were talking about the idea of letting go of the negative thought. And she's like, she's I believe a therapist by trade, and she's talking about how she recognizes that this is a great thing to be able to do, but also we don't want to just pretend that everything's okay, stick your head in the sand. But that's different from, she said, what did she say? Like creating a stew. You create a negativity stew. You just let it boil and you dive into it. We don't want that either, right? We don't want to kind of stew in it. So the balance is there. And this is my answer to her this morning was, you you don't have to do it exactly this way. And I'm not saying that like the martial arts philosophy or the Zen philosophy is always the perfect for everybody in every situation, but this is the tool that we use, is to think about balance. How am I off balance in any direction? And if I notice, like most people, that I'm off balance in the direction of not just recognizing the negative, but also kind of ruminating in it and spiraling into it, then I want to be able to kind of let that go and rebalance in this way. And if I'm too off balance in the way that I'm just letting everything go and not doing anything about it, then I got to find that sense of balance again. And it always starts with recognition, which I'm sure you have down. As most people do, we're pretty good at recognizing the thing that's going wrong, whatever it is. But then there's this idea of a second thought, which is kind of similar to that gap that I was talking about. So your first thought is something's going wrong. And then for most people, the second thought is like something that sounds something like, I suck. I keep doing this. Why can't I get this right? And the thing that you interject might come right after that, because sometimes we let it slip until we get to that thought of judgment, right? And that's okay. But the next thought we want to try to avoid being just the inevitable slipping down into that cycle. Insert something that sounds like, but wait, is that true? And you know, when you start that self-judgment, if we can create this habit of going to that thought or creating that pause or that gap in between, that little space that you create, whether it's by asking yourself, is that true? Or it's literally just time, space that you created by letting go of the thought and just being in the present with your breath, which is what we practice in meditation. That gives you your jumping off point to decide what to do next with it. And this is so important, because without that time to decide, we're just robots. We're negativity automatons, and we just go from one thing to the next because it's like we're programmed to do it. So create that space. And when you ask yourself, is that so? Is this really true? Is this really the way that I need to go? Is this the most helpful way for me to be in this moment? Sometimes the answer will be yes. Usually the answer is no. And it's like some other tack that you can take. I know that all sounds quite cerebral, and I'm sure that you'll love that. There are other, more emotional ways to go around it. Try to practice self-love, and acceptance can really have that to it. I think in meditation, one of the biggest issues that I had for forever was I'd be meditating, I'd have a thought, I'd recognize that I have a thought. I didn't recognize the first one, I recognized the 10th one or the 50th one, or like 30 minutes into meditation, wait, I've been thinking the whole time. And then my next thought is, I'm terrible at meditation. Am I ever going to get this? And the real problem with that is we are associating the recognition of the thought coming back to the present as a bad thing. As soon as we start beating ourselves up, we start creating this negative feedback loop and this negative reinforcement, as opposed to you recognize it and you're like, oh, that's funny. I've been thinking a whole lot instead of meditating. And you use that as your cue to go back to the breath. And in that, it's not like, there are two ways that I can imagine people doing this. The first one, you recognize the thought, you're like, oh, I got to go back to the breath. That's what the breath feels like. Or you go, I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm going to come back to the breath. And it's like this. And that feels really nice. And there's a sense of self-love and self-care to that. There's a sense of acceptance. And that gives us a positive experience that we are connecting to the recognition of the breath, the recognition rather of the mind wandering. And that's what we need, because that's the first key, is to recognize and then to be able to let it go. So try that. If it works for you to just take that gentle sigh the next time you recognize you're getting into that loop of being a perfectionist and like, I got to get it right now. Just recognize that truly the only thing that you need to get right in this moment is to breathe. I told the last Kung Fu class this, but I was talking to the kids about the challenge this week about breathing and just going back to the breath. And I asked, this is like a class of 5-year-olds, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. I'm like, why do you think it's important that we breathe in martial arts? And only one kid answers. All the other kids are like, but this kid raises his hand. And I'm like, what do you think, sir? And he's like, well, you have to breathe. Otherwise you will not be able to live. I'm like, absolutely. You will die if you don't breathe. And that is the answer that I was looking for. But I was like, then also in martial arts, besides that, it gives us power when we exhale, when we strike and all this stuff. But really what it gives us is that ability to come back to the present and just live here now. And there's no higher purpose. There's nothing else that we really have to do in this moment. Now, maybe in the next moment, there's something that you have to do, but in this moment, there's nothing else to do. So when you're meditating, try to remind yourself of that. You're going to sit there, and the thoughts that you're going to be having are going to take you in all kinds of fun directions, like I really should be doing this work right now, or I really should be doing this, or I wonder what I'm going to eat for dinner, or whatever. And all that stuff is superfluous. It is unnecessary to say the least. Like, that's a kind way of putting it. It is really just the breath. This is it. This is all you have to do in this moment. Now, at some point, you're going to have to eat some food, and at some point, you're going to have to sleep, and at some point, you're going to have to make money or whatever. But in this moment, this is kind of the ultimate recognition of the present and the ultimate way to let go of all that extra stuff and to just truly be your highest self, and just your most human, perfect self is to just breathe. Don't pile anything else onto it. There's nothing else to do right now. So just give it one of these. Other question. You make me just stare at you for the next 10. Yes, ma'am.
If it's related to relating to people when you're doing things, right? Because I have a tendency to like focus on the thing that I'm doing very much. And I'm just like doing my thing. I'm just sitting there doing my thing. And I'm curious about how the interaction with people comes into that. When
Are we talking about a work scenario, or like when you're trying to, like, I know you're trying to help train somebody today, but is it like that kind of thing? Or it's like, I'm literally just doing my thing and then there's another person in the room and should I talk to them? What are you saying?
oh, both situations actually.
Sure.
It could be either, it's just like, I notice sometimes if I'm at home and I'm like journaling or I read my book or whatever, and email comes and I'll be like, it just comes in. And it's not necessarily an interaction, but it's like, then it's like, well, should I be doing an interaction? I don't know, it's like some interruption that happens. And I guess it's more the question about the transition between being with yourself and then being with other people, and how the being within the moment is how the transition.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I think this is a great question. I think it's the first time I've had this question. And of course, there are many different ways that this could look. My first thought was, when you were talking about this, like, why don't you just keep journaling and let Ian just sit over there? And that could be the way that you deal with it, right? And I think sometimes people will enter into our space just for the sense of being close to somebody, and we should really enjoy that and be totally okay with it. Like, sometimes there's nothing to do. There's no kind of other interaction that has to be other than just literally being in the same space as somebody. I think meditation is a great example of this. When we meditate as a class, it has a different kind of feeling, a different kind of energy. And it's not like you're like waving to each other during meditation or like having a conversation. It's like just the energy of being in a room with more people is nice. And that's a very human thing. So we should be, totally great with that. And I have had this experience infinite times where I feel like I gotta say something. This is awkward, just sitting in silence with this person. Like, something's got to be said. We have to do something. We have to get something done, whatever. And I think it's important to just remind yourself that it's great to just be there in silence, and you can just each be doing your own thing. But of course, there are times, and I think most of the time somebody enters into your space, there is going to be a transition into actually interacting beyond just the being in the same space. And being in the same space is a kind of interaction. Of course, there's an energy to that too, right? If you're thrown off because he walks in the room and he sits down and you're journaling and you're like, you start doing that, he will feel that, and you definitely will feel that, and that's not helping anybody. So yeah, when somebody walks into your space, there's some kind of a transition already happening there. And yeah, I'm going to try not to just take it into the same realm of the last question. I'm thinking like, acceptance and all that is great. It's important. Recognizing when we're trying to make something more of it than it needs to be. And I don't mean necessarily like getting angry about it, but just literally like, am I feeling like I have to turn this into something that it doesn't have to be? That's my thing is, do I have to, say something? Do I have to, for a lot of us, it's like, do I have to break this tension with some kind of a joke? And sometimes it's like kind of a serious moment that's totally okay to just be there in seriousness or in silence and feel like I have to say something funny so that we can, ease the mood and all that. And that hardly ever has to happen. Yeah, how is it? It's like when you're driving down the street and you're, on the freeway. I go every Monday and Friday, I drive up to Pasadena to take Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I go up the 110. And the 110 is, I think, like the most dangerous freeway in the country, something like that. And it's messed up. It's old. And the on-ramps, you're going, I drive a kind of a normal speed. I go close to the speed limit, which I think is like 65 or something. And there's a stop sign, and they have like a 10-foot on-ramp to go 65. It doesn't happen. Most cars don't go that fast. So you should not be in the right lane of the 110, and yet people are. And you're just like this the whole time you're trying to get on. I just don't even mess with those on ramps at all. I stay in the left lane and I go my own thing. But let's pretend that you're in that situation and sometimes it can be a very kind of jerky merging with the two cars, and sometimes it's very smooth. A newer freeway, you're getting from the 10 onto the 405, and they figured it all out. It's like 100 years old. And you know what that feels like. It's easy, it's nice. And sometimes it's almost like the other car is not even there. Sometimes it's like, I got to just tap on the brake a little bit, or sometimes I got to speed up a little bit, but you're kind of dancing with that other car. And that's when it goes well, when it goes right. And when it doesn't, then it gets real awkward, and sometimes there's a car accident. So how exactly does that work? I don't fully know. We know how that feels, when it feels effortless, when it feels like, of course, it's something that we've done many times before. Don't get on the 110 unless you've driven many times before. But it's like, you expect it to happen, you're prepared for it, and you're just kind of taking the smallest possible step to ease in with this other person. You're not ignoring them. You can't just pretend that that car's not coming. You can't just pretend that that person's not there. But, sometimes that person's going to be real aggressive and they're going to step on the gas and try to get there a little bit too fast. And sometimes they'll just be easing their way in. So you kind of match whatever they're doing. You can try that. I think that this ability to mesh energy with somebody, whatever that means in that moment, is really key, as opposed to trying to force something to happen or to think it should be this way or that way. Just kind of take them with whatever they're bringing to the table. And I think usually it's going to involve some kind of looking at that person. You can't see them. It's hard to tell what they want or what's going on. And just try to let go of any kind of expectations or baggage or anything, and just merge. And sometimes it's just like so smooth. You're sitting there doing your thing and they just come over and sit next to you and do their thing. And it was like so easy. And sometimes it's like, nope, they have to get into your lane. And so there's a conversation or something. But I think letting go of expectations or feeling like we have to make it a certain way is really what allows us to merge. When you're on the freeway and somebody starts coming and you start to get this attitude in your head that sounds like, oh no, you didn't, like you're not trying to get into my lane right now. And so you start speeding up, and that's when it causes issues. So same thing, when somebody's getting in your space, try to recognize that thought if it starts to happen and just let it go, come back to the breath or whatever it is to be focused on. And with that, I've again talked for way too long, so we're going to sit comfortably. We'll go over details of posture and stuff. The ultimate form of what Catherine's asking about is our ability to be with ourselves. If you can just be with yourself, whatever shows up, you can merge with that and then let it go if it's something to let go. So starts with a good posture. Your knees are even with or below your hips. So if you're sitting cross-legged, that's fine. Just make sure your knees are not sticking up too high. Your hands are upturned at the point between your thighs and your abdomen. So basically hugging the hips. And you want to try not to slouch. So keep your hands up here if you can. They can be together or separate. Your shoulders roll back and relax. Your chin's parallel to the ground. Close eyes. And your eyes are slightly upturned. So this helps us to associate this position of our body with a raised consciousness, and really raising the eyes does help us do that in the moment. You're not in the everyday consciousness. When your eyes are forward, you're not in the kind of subconscious, sleepy consciousness. When your eyes are down, you're looking slightly up. And you can think of it like you're looking at the point between your eyebrows, or you can think of it like you're just raising your eyes up to that level without crossing them. And from here, relax and watch the breath. Let go of all thoughts, worries, and cares. Be here now. Tonight, when you recognize that your mind has wandered and you've been stewing on something, let it go with a gentle sighing breath, but try not to make too much noise so you don't mess with the people sitting next to you. You can just give it a nice, relaxed, easy breath. Return back to the breath as many times as it takes.